Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
All right, everyone. I've got Dr. Glenn Livingston on the line today, and we're going to talk about eating. And I would love to welcome you to our show, the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we're talking about nutritional therapy and the holistic method to help transform the whole athlete from the inside out. And I thought your story is a little different. So I'd like to have you kind of share with us your passion and your purpose and how you're creating impact in the world today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate the chance to talk to your audience. My purpose in a nutshell is to help 1 million people stop overeating beyond their own best judgment each year. That's my purpose. And the reason that I do that is because I used to have a big problem myself. I'm 6'4". I'm reasonably muscular. And when I was a kid, I figured out that if I worked out for 2.5 or 3 hours a day, that I could eat whatever I wanted to.
As a kid.
Yeah, as a kid, before my metabolism slowed down and I had, a wife and responsibilities and patience and that kind of thing. And I basically turned myself into a big exercising, sleeping, and pooping machine. And I thought it was great. I just thought it was great. But when I did get older, I found that the foods had a hold on me and I couldn't slow down. So even though I didn't have time to work out for 2.5 or 3 hours a day, and even though I was gaining weight, I really couldn't. I was sitting with suicidal patients and I was thinking about when could I get the next pizza, and I would be working with clients who just had an affair, and I would be wondering when I could get to the deli and dislodge my jaw and empty the contents of the tray into it. So,
everyone has their own story or your why of what you do now. So that's makes sense.
Yeah.
More personal.
So Debbie, I'm a psychologist, and I come from a family of 17 therapists. And standing joke is that if something breaks in the house, everybody knows how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it. But because I'm a psychologist, I went at it from a very psychological perspective. I figured that there must be a hole in my heart, and if I could fill the hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to keep trying to fill a hole in my stomach. And so I saw the best doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, and I took medication, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I did everything I could to love myself thin. And it just didn't work. It was a very soulful journey. And I would get thin for a little while, and then I would get a lot heavier. And then I would get thin, and I get a lot heavier. But it wasn't working. It seemed like the more that I did, actually, the more obsessed I got with food, and the worse that things got. And over the course of 25 years or so, I finally came around and started to understand that I had to approach it with a different paradigm. The paradigm I eventually approached it with that worked was more of an alpha wolf's paradigm. If an alpha wolf is challenged by another member of the pack for leadership, it doesn't say, "Oh my goodness, somebody needs a hug." It says, "Get back in line or I'll kill you." It snarls and it growls and says, "Get back in line or I'll kill you." Right? It takes a dominant position. And I started to think of these urges that I had to overeat as just a biological urge, nothing different than my bladder might generate when it said that I really have to pee. Well, if I really had to pee right now, I don't. But if I did, I would wait until I had a chance to go to the bathroom later. I wouldn't just go right at the moment. Or, our reproductive organs, they produce very powerful urges, but we don't run up and kiss attractive people on the street. And I said, okay, so there's this part of my body, and it turns out it's the reptilian brain. It's the brainstem, and then the part that we think of ourselves as human, that's more in the neocortex and the more later evolved part of the brain that's above the reptilian brain. Well, it turns out that the part of the brain that responds to addiction, it's the reptilian brain, and that part of the brain doesn't know love. It knows eat, mate, or kill. It sees something in the environment, it says, don't eat that thing, Do I mate with that thing or do I kill that thing? And it's not until the mammalian brain of the neocortex evolved that we were able to say, wait a minute, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, well, how's it going to impact your loved ones? What's that going to do to your tribe? What's that going to do to your long-term plans and aspirations and goals, some of which could be weight loss or fitness or endurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was going about it the wrong way. I also found out, because I was not just a clinical psychologist, I never had kids and I never commuted, so I did a lot of consulting for business with big companies, a lot in the food industry. And I knew that big food was engineering these food-like substances, these hyper-palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins and salt. And they're all designed to hit our bliss points without giving us enough nutrition to feel satisfied. And so it was an overwhelming force that was against us. And the advertising industry, most people think advertising doesn't affect them, but it affects you more when you think it doesn't affect you because your sales resistance is down. They're designing things to make us feel like we can't live without this stuff. I remember a VP in the food bar manufacturing industry told me that their biggest insight to make the most profit was when they took the vitamins out of the bar because it was making them taste bad, and they put the money into the packaging instead, so that the packaging would look vibrant and colorful, and that signals the brain, just like a big frickin' salad with carrots and blueberries and, red tomatoes and yellow. That diversity of colors is supposed to signal a diversity of nutrients that are available, but it wasn't. They were faking us out. And so I said, wow, there's this overwhelming force against us. The lizard brain doesn't know love. We really have to overtake the lizard brain. The final thing that changed my mind was that I did this 40,000 person study. And I asked everybody, I was getting paid a lot of money to do all these studies. I figured I'd do one for myself. I asked everybody on the internet over the course of about 5 years what foods they struggled with and where they were stressed in their life. And what I found out was that people who struggled with chocolate, and my binges always started with chocolate. Just hand off over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt, that kind of thing. People like me, we tended to be lonely or brokenhearted, tend to be stressed in our love lives. People who were struggling with crunchy, salty things tended to be stressed at work, and people who were struggling with soft, chewy things tended to be stressed at home.
Wow.
I thought that was, so I figured that was going to solve it.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you one last story, and then I'll shut up and let you ask me questions. So this was my last effort to try and love myself thin, was talking to my mom. And I said, Mom, I'm a chocoholic, and actually so are you. And I have this research that says it's because but it's associated with us feeling brokenhearted, lonely. And I was in a bad marriage at the time. And I said, Mom, but what is it in my history that could have created this? How did this pattern get set up? And she gets this awful look on her face. And she goes, I'm so sorry. I said, Mom, whatever it is, it's 40 years ago. I love you. Just tell me what it is. And she's like, I'm so sorry. But, in 1965, when you were 1 year old, I was actually terrified. My husband, your dad, was a captain in the Army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I had no viable way to make a living, and we had another one on the way, and I was just worried I was going to be a single mother with 2 kids, and I'll be an Army widow. And at the same time, my dad, your grandfather, just got out of jail, and he was guilty, and he did bad things. And I was devastated. So I was depressed and anxious and staring at the wall a lot of the time. And I didn't have the wherewithal to hug you and love you and hold you when you came running to me to be hugged and loved and held. So what I did was I got a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup, and I put it in a refrigerator on the floor. And when you came running to me, I'd say, honey, go get your Bosco. And you'd go crawling over to the refrigerator. You take out the chocolate Bosco syrup, you'd suck on the bottle, and you go into a chocolate sugar coma. And Debbie, if this were the movies, at that point, my addiction would have been over, right? Mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry, and we'd forgive each other, and I would never have trouble with chocolate again. we obviously, we hugged, and I learned an awful lot. It was a really good conversation to have because I could forgive myself. I could forgive her. I learned all kinds of things about her that I didn't know. But in the end, my chocolate eating got worse because there's this crazy little voice in my head, and it went something like this. Hey, Glenn, you know what? You're right. Our mama didn't love us enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in our heart. And until we can find the love of our life and get out of this lousy marriage, we've got to go and get some chocolate. Let's go get some right now. Yippee. And I realized that it was that voice of justification that was making things difficult. And if I could use an analogy, if the emotion is the fire, right? You could have a roaring fire in a well-contained fireplace that becomes the center of hearth and home. People would gather around it. They would tell stories. It would keep everything warm. There's no problem with that. The problem is if there's something poking holes in the fireplace. And I realized that it was that voice of justification that was saying, Glenn, you worked out hard enough today. You could have some chocolate, or it comes from a cocoa bean and that grows on a plant. So chocolate's really a vegetable. All kinds of crazy things. You could start tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you start tomorrow. Don't worry about today. Then that's what I had to deal with, is how do I disempower that voice? And so here's what I did, which is relatively embarrassing for a sophisticated psychologist who's done tens of millions of dollars of consulting. But I never thought I was going to publish this. This was just a private thing. I kept it in a journal. I said, my lizard brain, I'm going to call that my inner pig. And I'm going to make a really clear line. I'm going to say, I'm never going to have chocolate during the week. I'll only ever have chocolate again on Saturday and Sunday. And if I hear any thought whatsoever in my head that suggests that I should have chocolate on a Wednesday or a Thursday or a Tuesday, I'm going to say, I don't want that. My pig does. My pig is squealing for pig slop. The chocolate was pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as ridiculous and crude as that was, after almost 3 decades of suffering, that's what started to give me those extra microseconds at the moment of impulse to wake up, remember who I was, remember the kind of person I wanted to be around chocolate, and then other things. And that's how I started to recover slowly but surely. I lost the weight, my triglycerides came down, all kinds of other health benefits. But most importantly, I no longer felt like I was powerless. I was no longer befuddled and confused. And it was just going to be a private thing. And then when I was getting divorced, I was a minor part of a publishing company. And the CEO asked if I could write a book that we could test some marketing theories on. And I showed him the journal. He calls me back 2 weeks later and he says, don't answer pig slop, and I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. He lost 86 pounds. And
wow.
So we published it, and we knew what we were doing with marketing, but still it really took off. And it's been hovering around the #1 book on the Kindle free side for Amazon for almost 3 years now. So
That's called Never Binge Again?
Never Binge Again, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, many questions. If you're trying to, the reptilian brain is more, what you're saying is I know Paul Chek always talks about this, the different parts of the brains, but so you're saying you're missing that love, you're eating to fill that void, versus if you were raised getting hugs and getting affection and filling that void that way, versus going to food to serve that desire, that need to feel grateful or happiness and satisfied. So I see this a lot. If you go to, example, athletic club, and you see people in the kids' locker room, kids are upset or crying, and then parents start so young, and I've noticed this for years because I used to work at this athletic club, and they give them the pink frosted cookie. If you're good, I'll give you that pink frosted cookie. So I think without knowing it, you're trying to figure out as a parent, and I don't have kids either, but how to bring their temper down or meltdown, and how to get them to be quiet. People, would give them food. Maybe now it's an iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like we're training people at an early on age to feel happiness and have that rush of dopamine to feel good if I had that sugar, and start those habits young, right? So you, in your journey personally, you've experienced, as with a psychology background and helping people kind of put this all together. And I always say, put the pieces of the puzzle together. Why do we have these behaviors? Why do we act a certain way? And how is that my relationship to food? How can I not stop that cycle of overeating, and where is that coming from? So it sounds like you kind of put everything together and found out what works for you. And that's what the Never Binge Again book is about. Like, so you're talking about strategies, how to overcome that connection or that relationship to food.
Yeah. Could I clarify a couple of things though?
Yes.
Would that be okay? So it's true that when the digestive system is overwhelmed with excessive digestive tasks, that the energy that we normally provided to the nervous system to conduct the emotions is not quite available. And so food does have an anesthetic effect. People say they comfort themselves with food or they numb out with food. But there's something else going on. See, the things that we overeat are usually not broccoli or oranges. It's usually some industrial food, some industrial processed food. And which, by the way, is why I say that every time you're looking for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container, there's some fat cat in a white suit with a mustache that's laughing all the way to the bank, right? Mm-hmm. But these artificial concentrations of pleasure didn't exist in the tropics. They didn't exist in the savannah when we were evolving. And another word for an artificial concentration of pleasure is a drug, right? Mm-hmm. It's an unnatural. No, I'm not saying you can't enjoy some potato chips or, I'm not saying everybody has to give them up, but I am saying that it's unnatural. And there's a high that's associated with eating these things. So when you're eating refined sugar, for example, you're going to have a high for 18 to 32 minutes followed by a crash. The reason that it's important to flip that paradigm and recognize that you're not just looking to comfort yourself, you're actually getting high with food, is because most people don't want to think of themselves as a drug addict. And if you think that you're just doing it to comfort yourself and you need more love, well, of course you deserve more love. Of course you deserve more comfort. And it goes on forever. And it also turns out that solving the emotional problem doesn't necessarily solve the food problem, because it doesn't matter what match struck the fire. Once the fire is going, it's got a life of its own. And you've got to put out that fire. So you want to be more of a fireman than a detective, right? Right.
Yes.
So that's what I want to say. Okay. In terms of more practical advice, when you're searching for the emotional reason that you eat, really what you're doing is asking yourself, well, why can't I stop eating? Why can't I stop eating? Turns out that the questions that we ask ourselves determine the evidence that we collect. So if you say, why can't I stop eating? What's wrong with me? Why can't I stop eating? You're telling your brain to collect evidence that there's something wrong with you and that you can't stop. If you tell your brain to do that and you collect enough evidence, you'll develop the belief that you really can't stop eating. You'll develop a failure identity. What you want to do is switch that question and ask, how can I stop eating instead? What can I do? How can I do it? And you don't have to solve all your emotional problems to do this. I really like having those psychological conversations about food. I treasure delving into people's souls and putting the pieces together and, having those really deep emotional catharses. But I found that it doesn't lead to fixing the problem. It leads to soulful growth. It leads to connection, but it doesn't lead to fixing the problem. So it's a very, very practical thing. Figure out what is your most significant trigger food or behavior. For me, it was chocolate. For some people, it's how they eat, not what they eat. Like you might want to make a rule that says, I'll never eat standing up again. Or I will always put my fork down between bites. Or I'll never eat in the car. For other people, it has more to do with focusing on adding more good stuff as opposed to restricting things. So I'll always have 5 servings of fruit and vegetables every day. I will always finish my morning run before I drink my smoothie. I will always always log my exercise before I have dinner. Something like that. Some people need to focus on positive behaviors more so than eliminating behaviors. But just one thing, very practically, decide what you're going to call your inner food enemy. It does not have to be a pig. That was not a very fortuitous choice. A lot of people don't like that, but that's what I called mine. I subsequently became a vegan, by the way, so it became even more difficult. But you call it your food monster, you call it your food demon, whatever you want to call it. And then make that line in the sand very, very clear so that you know exactly what healthy behavior versus unhealthy behavior is. And then watch your inner enemy try to talk you out of it. It's okay that you have these other thoughts. We have two minds. There's a part of us that wants to pursue our best plans and thinking, and then there's the part of us that responds to perceived emergencies, fight or flight, feast or famine, that will come up with any reason to talk us out of it. Watch yourself try to talk yourself out of it when you hear a voice in your head that suggests that you shouldn't follow your rule. Take a breath, tense up your muscles for a second, then let it all out and say, okay, where is the lie? Where is the lie in what it's saying? Suppose your pig says, well, you could start tomorrow. Well, the principle of neuroplasticity says that what fires together wires together, which means that we're either reinforcing or extinguishing our addictions. We're never really standing still. So if you indulge today, it's going to be harder to start tomorrow. It does make a difference what you do right now. What you want to do is welcome the craving, allow it to pass through you till those feelings aren't facts. Tell yourself it's going to be easier tomorrow if you don't do it today. And say, oh boy, I have a craving. It's a chance to extinguish the craving. You can't extinguish the craving without having it. So
I want to switch this around to more specific topic or audience, the endurance athlete. So I know a lot of people that do, for example, triathlons or racing tend to be more type A, addictive, obsessive, somewhat personalities that they'll do anything to get to race weight if they're competing in top of your age group and if they're really serious about placing in their age group or overall. So what are some strategies to help people not be obsessed? Because I think it's slightly eating disorder-ish or having, that binge
can be.
Is somewhat of addictive that, okay, I'm not going to eat anything. And this is another topic. I'm afraid of these people fasting so much because I feel that shifting your mindset, like anorexia, that you're scared to eat or you're going to binge. And if that's bulimia or anorexia or whatever direction you go. So it's a whole another can of worms. But it's for an endurance athlete trying to train for race weight and wants to get a certain way. How do we shift our mindset so we're approaching our relationship to food in a healthy way, that food is fuel for your body, and not think I have to not have this, I can't eat that, I can't do that. That's going to set yourself up for a binge after the race.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. And people who are bingers who become very overweight are also very good dieters. And what they don't recognize is they're addicted to both sides of the cycle. Mm-hmm. That you're keeping your body in a feast or famine state. And it only makes sense that if your body experiences periods of perceived famine, for practical reasons, I like to define that as losing more than 2 pounds a week. If you're losing more than 2 pounds a week, you're probably having difficulty getting the appropriate amount of nutrition and calories into your body. And there is the beginning of perceiving there to be a state of famine, which means that as soon as food is available, your brain is going to say, eat everything. We really have to hoard it. And so first and foremost, what you want to do is leave yourself enough time. Make sure that you're planning for a race in September, you have enough weeks to get there at 2 pounds a week so that you're not going to be tempted to go overboard and lose weight too quickly. Now, I personally, there are different philosophies of eating and working with eating disorders in the community. What you're describing is an idea that any type of restriction, including mental restriction, can create a binge, and that it's not necessarily healthy to distinguish between healthy versus unhealthy food, that everything is okay in moderation. That is a philosophy that works for a lot of people. It's also a philosophy that doesn't work for some people. Having spent the amount of time I spent in the big food industry consulting for these companies, and knowing that, for example, it's legal to include flavored cardboard as a filler. I could show you examples.
That's sad.
So I think that, if we lived in the tropics and we didn't have all these drugs, all these concentrated sources of pleasure that are designed to overwhelm our best judgment, then it would be okay to eat 100% intuitively all the time. I think we could listen to our bodies. Our bodies would know when we've had enough bananas and lettuce, or wild animal protein, whatever you really believe we were eating back then. But with billions of dollars aligned against us to overwhelm our best judgment, I think that it requires some boundary setting. And I liken it to, not to a really tense restriction, but if you're a city traffic planner and there are a bunch of dangerous intersections, you got to put up a traffic light, right? You don't have to obsess about that traffic light. You know what to do at a traffic light. You know when to stop and when to go. And you just drive around the city. And as a matter of fact, take a city like Manhattan, if there weren't a lot of traffic lights, nobody would get anywhere. You have 11 million people in one place. You have a bunch of angry New Yorkers at every intersection.
That would not be good.
That would not be good. So I try to encourage people to find a minimum of restriction, a minimum of rules that they need to follow to protect themselves in their dangerous situations, but no less and no more. So you don't want to put a traffic light where a stop sign would be okay, because you're unnecessarily slowing things down. So, for example, if you're the kind of person who does okay with a couple of drinks now and then, or a couple of squares of chocolate, then I would not advise you to just stop drinking or stop having chocolate. I would say, okay, so I'll never have more than 2 drinks a night, or I'll have 1 ounce of chocolate per day, or dark chocolate, or whatever. It's just so that you're not getting in trouble with it. And if there are areas where you don't get in trouble, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't make a rule.
Yeah.
So you minimize it. You want to maximize your freedom, but you want to protect yourself also.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is, a big area right now of intermittent fasting and nutritional ketosis. And I find that, it makes sense to me to feast. That word feast means binge to me. So teaching people how to eat the right amount, but not diet in their time restricted eating window. And I know I have clients that I coach that's like still in the mentality that, all right, I'm going to eat, I have this little half serving this and that. I'm like, no, don't diet. It's a lifestyle habit. We're teaching you how to eat and feed and fuel your body and your mind, and having real food, and teach people that hopefully they can get rid of those sugar cravings by adding more healthy fats to their food plan. Because once you break that and you get more savory cravings versus sugar cravings and get fat adapted, is what we talk a lot about. It's like, how do I break that cycle? But I know what you're talking earlier about is that emotional connection to food. I have some people that I've known a long time. They're always, that constant dieter, always looking for the quick fix, but they're just not looking at, okay, why do I have this roadblock and have this inability to just think of food as nourishment and enjoy it, and instead of like, it's going to be this feast and binge secretly behind doors that no one knows, but they're always struggling. So it's teaching people, I think, what you're looking at or sharing with your book and your services is how can you, if you're battling that, if you feel like you can't try this new nutritional ketosis or be low carb and try fasting, and you still have those areas of opportunity that's like there's something missing, because everyone's bio-individual and there's not one size fits all. And there's a lot of people that I think still struggle with weight because of what's your why and what's that root cause of what that missing void or whatever it is. So you help people to figure that out and guide them that way? Do you do coaching, counseling with them, or what?
Our book is diet agnostic. So we help people regardless of their dietary philosophy. I'm not a nutritionist or a doctor or I have some nutritional knowledge from all the work and reading that I've done and how I figured it out myself, but I'm not intellectually prepared to debate you on the right vehicle. So I
don't think, just to interrupt real quick, I don't think you need to know anything about nutrition, because you're working with the people that it's nothing to do with what you're eating. It's why you're eating it.
Exactly. So we help people to find the right custom food plan for them personally. Mm-hmm. We do it with a book, we do it with a podcast, we do it with a free Facebook forum, and then we have some coaching programs as well.
And let's share those links, because I know we're short on time. And this is just such an important topic, I think, is probably why you're passionate and do all this work that you do in this area, because I think so many people get obsessed with food and being thin and looking good. And it's just, some people just struggle with the psychology part of it, and it's not easy just to switch what you're eating and do this instead. And here's a meal plan. But there's other stuff going on that makes those differences in that relationship to food and your lifestyle habits.
Yeah. So I'd like to give you all a free copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. You can get that at neverbingeagain.com. Click on the big red button and sign up for the reader bonuses. You'll get a copy of the book in addition to a set of food plan starter templates. So we thought through a simple set of rules for just about every dietary philosophy there is out there. And we call them starter templates because you take them and adopt them for yourself. You change them for your own needs. And then I know this is a kind of weird thing in theory. You must be thinking, why in the world does Debbie have this psychologist who's got a pig inside of him, and he doesn't eat pig slop, he doesn't let farm animals tell him what's going on here? This sounds really harsh. This sounds really mean. It's not. If you listen to some of the full-length sessions, and I recorded a whole bunch of full-length sessions you can hear, then you'll see how compassionate a philosophy it actually is, and how it actually enhances people's self-esteem. It takes them from feeling hopeless and desperate and confused and powerless to feeling hopeful and enthusiastic and powerful in really 1 or 2 sessions. So I wanted you to hear that in process and understand that this was actually a compassionate thing that I was doing, that I wasn't just some mad scientist who had a pig inside of him. So,
well, I love that you're doing what you're doing, and keep it up, because I think it's not, a lot of people are not getting that information out there. So I appreciate that. And I'm glad we can share that. And I'm sure some of our listeners know other friends and family members that could use this help, because I know as a personal trainer for 25 years, there's a lot of people struggling with their relationship with food. And it's part of the reason I do what I do with the holistic method is, I was personal training people for years and years. And it's like, I can't help you get healthy. And my passion is to help people feel better and move better and look better on the inside and out. And you can't just do that by exercising more. And I always say you can't out exercise a bad diet, but you can't, you got to figure out what works for you. And that
but you can out eat a good exercise session.
Yes. Yeah. So
we work with a lot of personal trainers to certify them in the method, by the way. But,
oh, good.
Yeah, that's a common story, what you're describing.
Yeah, that's why I kind of veering off of fitness and going into health coaching, because you really can't, it's not what, your 2-3 exercise sessions a week, and the rest of your day, what are you doing in your sleep and your stress level? So, all right, well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate your time and your energy and sharing your passion with us and how you can help other people.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was delightful.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.